I like when people get roundhouse kicked to the face for no reason. I like when strollers get pushed into oncoming traffic. I like when fucking machine guns from helicopters manage to like make a semi blow up going down the highway or whatever. It's just like, I like that, and I think that that's a good movie. To have all this in one place, it's like, if you took someone from like 1980 and put them in a room, they'd just be like, what, like, how can you own, like, each one of those would be $100.
What do you remember thinking when you saw some of these horror movie covers, not unlike the ones that you have right now, like when you're that young?
Like when you're that age, you just really have no idea. I mean, there's no context for it. It's I'm sure in some cases what you're imagining is almost crazier than what's actually on there. Actually, in most cases, especially with like Wizard video titles. I think that I was just always curious because I read comic books at the time, and some of the artwork isn't too far off from that. Sans the superhero stuff, but I like Tales from the Crypt. When I first started collecting, I was predominantly a horror collector, as I think most people start off that way, because it's just, those are the obscure ones you remember the covers for. I tend to rotate a lot between action and horror, and then as you realize there's also this other realm to go into, comedies and like the boner jams, like the sex comedy stuff.
This VCR was made just a couple years before this monitor, and it's made to project that quality of image. I think it makes it look better, and I think it's a warmer picture. I think that it's like a more organic picture. I don't need to see like little tiny spots on your chin. I don't need to see that much definition. And with some movies it ruins them. There's movies like City of the Walking Dead where it's like, oh, you can see how fucking fake the makeup looks. It looks like shit. But if you watch the VHS tape, it's kind of scary. It's still funny at times, but like you can't see where like the makeup stops and the face begins. But if you watch it on Blu-ray, it's like regular skin, then it's blue, and then like when they were filming it, they couldn't see that, and then they like bring up the quality, and it kind of ruins some of the, like just the stuff that lurks in the corners, like the darkness that's there, kind of lends itself to fear and just certain things. My favorite movies are probably the ones where it's one guy who does the soundtrack, he's the star, he's the director somehow, and he writes it, and there's just like no quality control. It's just like one guy, his dream, this happens, and no one ever stops him and says, this is ridiculous, you shouldn't do this part. Maybe the acting's not all there, but there's something charming and very like punk rock about these movies that like are made on like a shoestring budget, and they just kind of like, that's their fucking dream. Like some of these movies, when you're watching them, like they're doing the best they can, and it's like something they've always wanted to do. They're finally doing it, and you look them up on IMDb. It's like the only movie they ever managed to like get funding for. Doesn't mean it was the only thing they ever wanted to do. I was born in Utica, New York. I was 3 years old. My dad moved to Des Moines to work at the Des Moines Register. Some of my earliest memories are going with my mom and dad to the video store. There was this video store, and when they went out of business, they set up a huge tent in the parking lot, and it was just all their tapes out in the parking lot, and they were $5 a piece, and my mom gave my brother and I each a box and said, fill it up. Like, they're never going to be this cheap ever again. I got really into music, and I've always been into music, and a lot of my collecting in my like late teens, early 20s was focused almost solely around like LPs, 7 inches, cassettes, tapes that were music, but it was still like the same kind of thing where you're like buying, you're filling in discographies, and you're filling in chunks that you feel like you're missing of favorite artists or whatever. I started getting older and started like looking at my video collection in the same way. So I went to my buddy's house in Fort Wayne, Indiana. His name's Shane, and he sings in this band called the Lurking Corpses. And that was my first real interaction with like a true tape head. And I went into his place, and he just had them all set up like this, where it's like by the company. And you could see that there was like a lot of meticulous time put into it. And all these tapes have been they were organized like this when I moved to this house, and then I reorganized them alphabetically by genre. So I had like an action wall, a horror section, comedy. And then after a year or two, I got sick of that, and it took me like 15, 16 hours. I organized them all back into this style.
A friend of mine and fellow collector from New York asked me if I would be interested in making a couple shirts of VHS logos, because he saw that I printed stuff and he knew I was into videos. Yeah, he asked me to do that, and then I was like, do you care if I just like post these as being available? And I couldn't believe the feedback. I mean, at the time I had like 600 followers or something, and I sold like 20 of each, you know, right off the bat. I was like, man, I should do some like companies that people know more. And some of these logos I spend 8-10 hours cleaning up and getting them to look the way that they do on the shirts. I don't just like take the shirt, scan it, and put it on. You know, like there's a lot of effort that goes into making it look the way that it does. Because I'm taking an image that's, you know, this big and making it this big. It's like, you know, it's hard to not end up with a pixelated, shitty looking image.
Like, how many Instagram followers do you have right now?
I have 8,500, and the quality, people always comment on how much they like the quality, because I print stuff like the way you used to print shirts. It's like a heavy, nice print that looks like it's plastisol ink. You know, I don't print these light, I don't know, sissy is not an okay word to say now. But
is it? I don't know.
I don't know. But I don't print like on those sissy skinny shirts, because I'm not that kind of build. That's not what I would wear. So I print on like Gildan, like heavy cotton shirts, and I print the shirts like you would print a band t-shirt, and it's made to last forever. Like that shirt should outlive you. 80 grand? Maybe more? Probably more?
Just in this basement?
Yeah, in there too, like in both spaces.
But
I mean, I have like...
But under this roof though, you got 80 grand in...
You know, there's also records upstairs, but you know, you gotta look at it like this. You got like 100, 100, 100, 100, 100, 50, 60, 80, 60, 100, 50, 80. And like this section is like that.
What do you think would make you get rid of your collection?
If I knew I was gonna die.
Are you married?
I am.
How long have you been married for?
That's a good question. That would be a question for my wife. We've been together for, let's see, it was 2019. I mean, it's been like 15 years or something. We've been married for like a decade. She's a ceramics teacher at a high school. She's a minimalist. She does have a record collection. That's kind of one of the first things we bonded on, was like our love of music.
So you said you have twin daughters?
Yeah.
And how old are they?
They're 2.
And what were their names?
Lucy and Nora.
And then the boy, right?
Yeah, it's Freddie.
And he's how old?
He's 4. It's definitely the best relationship I've ever been in. I get grumpy a lot and get frustrated because I'm a very independent person, and having kids makes it not possible for you to be very independent. Don't believe the hype that having kids is awesome. I love my kids, and I think it's going to get really awesome, but the first few years were very hard. There was an entire year I didn't sleep in my bed because my daughters would not sleep through the night. They woke up every 2 hours. My mom was a little bit of a hoarder. I think you can kind of see that might have rubbed off a little. My stuff's more well organized than hers was, but that's definitely where it came from. It's hard to say that about your own relatives. I feel like there's no other way to say it, though, because we had rooms in our house that were floor-to-ceiling stuff. We had air. Like, there was one room in our house growing up that was as big as this, that was just art supplies, and it was all the way up to here, and it was not organized in any way. It was just like a pile. It was almost like just throwing bags and boxes on top of each other. And then when they moved to Indiana, they got a farm, and she filled up a whole barn like that. It was there were paths and stuff, but it was just a lot of stuff. On and off, she was a teacher's assistant. She worked at some thrift store type places, some like kids reselling clothes type places. I could show you some art pieces. She did a lot of stuff with mosaics. She did stained glass. She did jewelry. She just like whatever she wanted to do. She just jumped around and did art stuff. She had some mental illness issues, and I think that she coped with some things with the purchasing of things. I definitely find that in myself sometimes. I'll like feel like I'm bummed out or something, and then I'll buy something and I feel better for a little while. What I can, like, my music is my art, I guess. And then, you know, she actually made physical art, and then I collect media stuff and she collected art stuff. But I definitely bonded with her a lot more than my dad. Me and my dad get along, but like there was just a lot more of a connection. There's moments that there's friction because he's kind of old school. I don't know how else to say that. I feel like it's just like almost being like an apologist for the way he can be. But the way he talks to women, he kind of talks down to women. I don't know if I'm just hearing that or if I'm imagining it. Like, my wife sure thinks so. There's also like a certain thing that happened when my mom passed away where like there's no one around to tell him that, like, hey, Henry, like maybe don't do that. Like, maybe you shouldn't be acting that way right now or like in public or whatever. I've heard that comes with age too. When guys get older, they're just like, fucking, I don't care.
What's that mean exactly? If you could sum it up in a sentence.
Walking around in his underwear, scratching his balls in front of like the whole family. Like that kind of thing. You know, just doesn't give a shit. Fucking farting, burping, just being gross. We get along we can joke and hang out and all that kind of sense. And he does like music too, and he's always supported everything I've ever done, and he's never told me that I'm wasting my time. He's never, like, any time I've had an interest, he's always asked how he can help. So I feel like a lot of people don't get that. So in the broad spectrum of things, I would say that he's been like a really good person, and I love him a lot.
Like I want to have a screen printing business. I want to play in a band. I want to have the freedom to do that stuff. You know, granted, you could go back to school, but like my wife has $40,000 worth of debt from Iowa. Like we'll probably have that forever. You know, when we first started doing it, I wasn't a stay-at-home dad every day. 3 days a week, her parents came over and watched Freddie when it was just Freddie, and so I still worked like almost full time, and then I also had night shifts. But when the girls came, her parents kind of like tapped out, I guess you could say. They didn't specifically say they didn't want to do it anymore, but they started hinting at like, is there anyone else that could help? Like, it was like, all right, you know, it's fine. You don't have to do it. And so I don't know how it's easier for me to do it by myself as opposed to them doing it together, but you know, they already raised kids. It's our job. If they're your kids, it's not babysitting if it's your kids. Which I hate when people call it babysitting. I also hate when people say that having a dog or a cat's like having a kid, because it's fucking not. It's nothing like it.
Would you trade it for anything else in the world, or?
You know, I think that I'm just getting into the fun stuff. He's 4. Freddie's starting to be a lot of fun.
But I'm not gonna be 4 all day, am I?
No, you'll be 5 next.
Yeah, I'll be 5 on my another birthday.
Yes, on your next.
And I'll get 5 candles.
I think I'll be a really good dad when it comes to kids. I might not have, the highlights of my existence were probably not when they were babies, keeping me up all night, making it so I couldn't eat or do anything I wanted to do. But like, I think it's going to be really fun here really soon. I'm starting to look forward to it more. I used to dread waking up. So I always scolded in my head my friends that would say that, yeah, like it's the most magical thing and stuff. It's like, yeah, if you don't have like any aspirations or like things that you want to accomplish, that's probably not the safest thing to do. Huh? You got it. I don't know. I don't see myself stopping. I see myself maybe like downsizing certain areas to make space for new things. Or figuring out a way. The dream is to have a space where I would have all this and I would have my screen printing stuff set up and it's not in my house. Like if I could someday afford a property that's just for that. But I don't know how I'd ever come up with that kind of money. Unless my business really takes off. there's something I think about the era that we grew up in where it was like, it was the last era of real innocence where, you know, we rode our bikes around and we could sneak into the nudie room at the video store and wonder about things. And there was a mystery to the world that we lived in.
I guess so.
And now everything's so accessible at the click of a button that there's no more mystery anymore. So I think the nostalgia for us older people is like remembering that, but for even these younger, because I see people that are in their early 20s collecting VHS tapes, there's no way they remember VHS in any real capacity. But I mean, you look at that time period and there's a mystery to it. There's like something intriguing about living in a world where not everything is just available at the click of a button. And I feel like that has in a way ruined the magic, if you will, of the world we live in. So I feel like that has a lot to do with my interest in these old things. And stuff was just made better back then. Movies, toys, games, everything was just made better in my opinion. So, as far as that goes, like, I like stuff, and I'm gonna keep collecting it as long as I can find ways to afford it.